Absolutely delighted to be joined on Football CFB by a man who was a very good footballer, and he's been highly regarded as a manager as well. Lee Clark played for Newcastle United. He also crossed that derby and played for Sunderland, as I'm sure we'll come to. He played at Fulham as well. 11 caps for the English under-21 side. Managed in England with Huddersfield, Birmingham, Blackpool, Bury, and a few others. Managed in Scotland with Kilmarnock, and is now managing in African football, something that I'm excited to ask him about. Lee, first of all, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks, Colin. Delighted to be on the show, and looking forward to our conversation.
The first question I've got for you, and I know you've had this question so much over the last few weeks, but you've swapped North East English football for North East African football. How did the move come about, and how excited are you for such a unique challenge?
It is. It's a fantastic challenge, and it's, as you rightly said, I've swapped the banks of the Tyne for the banks of the Nile. My hotel here looks out onto the River Nile, so a little bit of history and in there. So, yeah, listen, I've always been a coach who's considered and wanted to do some overseas coaching. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago in Europe, but I had to turn that down because my father was quite ill at the time, and I didn't want to go overseas at that moment in time and, have to, get some bad news and try and find a way back to him quickly. So I decided that was too important. So I had to let that move go by. And then obviously, this opportunity arose a few weeks ago. I had the call, would I be interested? Looked up the club, Al Merrikh, and seen that it was one of the biggest clubs in Africa, huge fan base when fans are allowed back in after the COVID, and compete in the African Champions League and the Arab Champions League, as well as obviously competing with our big rivals Hilal for the championship. So all those things, I thought, why not? Let's experience something different, coaching in a different continent, coaching different mentality of players, and obviously experiencing a different lifestyle.
Absolutely. And in terms of this new experience, how much will you draw on your past experiences as a coach, both in England and in Scotland? Because you've managed some really big clubs.
Of course, you learn at some of every club you've been at. There's been, days where things haven't gone so well and days when they've gone terrifically well, and you pick up experiences from all those, and you try to use even the good and the bad for yourself going forward. The bad, you can see the warning signs of what could happen, and you try and stop those from happening again. So, and you've experienced them before, so if they were to come, you know how to possibly handle them a bit differently. So yeah, listen, I've come in, the group of players have been absolutely fantastic. We've got a big Champions League game on Saturday against Al Ahly, the big Egyptian powerhouse who've won the African Champions League 9 times. And we've been in a camp now for 10 days, and we've got the rest of the week. So we would have been together for 14 days. The only players away we had 6 players away with the Sudan national team who have come out on a high as well. They've just qualified for the African Nations by beating South Africa last night 2-0. I was at the game. And so, the whole country is on a real up. So if we can produce a shock result on Saturday, we continue the feel-good factor. And players, as I touched on, they've been brilliant. They've bought into my ideas. We've won both our league games that I've managed in, and so we're 3 points behind our rivals Hilal with a game in hand. And so yeah, I'm really enjoying being on the grass again, coaching, and I'm enjoying the new environment.
Well, I wish you all the very best with that, and it's something I'm sure that many people here in the UK will keep an eye on. To rewind with you to your playing days, you started at Newcastle United, a boyhood Newcastle United fan, I believe. What was that experience like for you growing up and being a part of a structure at the club that you loved before breaking into that first team?
Well, it was unbelievably special. I always say it's living the dream. and I went to my first game as a Newcastle fan in 1980 as an 8-year-old. Obviously, 82 came along, and Keegan, the player, arrived and took us to places that we could never imagine. 32,000 in the stadium, and fantastic performances. And then obviously, as I was getting older, because I never ever thought you didn't understand really why and how players got to represent Newcastle. You thought that was like a privileged position. So someone like myself never ever thought that would be possible. But then as I got older, 11, 12, I got invited to the Centre of Excellence, which is like equivalent to an academy there, and trained with them. And then obviously when I became captain of England schoolboys, there was many clubs after my signature, but as soon as Newcastle were in and they wanted to take us, there was only one place I was going. And then made my first team debut at 17. So just had a special time. I mean, when I first broke into the team, I wasn't driving. I hadn't passed my driving test, so I used to get the bus from my home to the city centre and get on the bus with the supporters and walk from the bus station to the ground at St James's. But the difference was they were going onto the terraces to support, and I was going into the dressing room to play. So that was just felt normal. They went one way through the turnstile and I went the other way. So, but an unbelievable time. And to top it all off, I was probably part of an era, the best era the club's had since they won the Fairs Cup in 1969, and a team that got so close to winning the Premier League.
In terms of, before we talk about that era of Newcastle, you mentioned being someone who was on the Gallagher to then playing in front of it. Lots of people, even to this day, talk about the noise that Newcastle fans make. Just how crucial is that for the team on the pitch? Because the fans, whether the club are winning and are on a high, like it was the case when you were there, or now when it's a wee bit more tricky, the fans still make that same passionate noise.
It's a stadium that over many years it'll be full. It's full to the rafters, no matter what position the team are in the table. They support the players, but they demand a lot as well. And the demand that you give everything for the jersey first and foremost. And if you give that, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt if things haven't gone particularly well in your own technical performance. All the demand is that, because ultimately it's a very working class area, and majority of the fans who go there aren't there in hospitality. They're there to be genuine supporters, and they're using their hard-earned cash that they've worked for that week to go to the match. So they just want to be rewarded with that, and seeing a group of players who are giving everything for the jersey.
And in terms of that era under Kevin Keegan in particular, I spoke to Les Ferdinand just before Christmas, and he talked about there being a real belief within that team that you could go on and win that title. And obviously you get so close as a team. How do you reflect back in that era? Because Newcastle at that time, I know obviously the nickname was the Entertainers, but just overall, whether they were entertaining or not, they got results, and they were a team that not many people wanted to face, even Manchester United at that time.
Yeah, we were challenging all teams. We'd go to Manchester United and Arsenal and Liverpool and Chelsea and take them on. Man City weren't a force then. It was before their money came into their club. So, we'd go there and take them all on, and we'd get positive results majority of the time. We'd get the odd loss. So, we're seeing the famous 4-3s at Anfield and stuff. But like you say, we were classed as the entertainers, but we entertained, but we won. I think in 5 Premier League seasons under Kevin Keegan, I think we lost 5 home games. So that tells you how good we were. There's this lazy journalism to say that we weren't very good defensively and the manager wasn't bothered about defending. Well, I think we averaged about being the 3rd best team in the league with our defensive stats as well. And of course, if we conceded 2, we tried to score 3. If we conceded 3, we tried to score 4. So it was just quite simple. So we had, the manager was unbelievable in his recruitment process. he very rarely failed in the transfer market with any players, if he did at all. And he was just continually improving the group. And also the players that were there from the start, we had to go with that and improve ourselves with that to stay in touch with those. And we did. And that was the competitive edge the squad had. You could make lots of changes to the group and it never weakened the team. We had a real strong squad. And, as you said, we're always challenging. I think we finished sixth once, was the lowest we finished under Keegan, and we were disappointed with that. I think we were gutted with that. In fact, that we felt like it had been a poor season. So, we wanted to be up there and challenging the teams to be going for the titles.
What was Kevin Keegan like as a man manager? Because there was so many good players within that squad. You think yourself, you think of Ferdinand, Shearer, Ginola, Lee. I could go on and on and on. There's just quality all over the park. How did he manage that core as a group?
He was fantastic. He was a psychologist before his time, a sports psychologist. He was a father figure. He was a motivator. He was, his man management skills were terrific. He knew how to get the best out of you. He made the group. The togetherness of the group was unbelievable. The best I've ever been around, and that was because of the environment he created. And he was a manager we all wanted to play for. We all wanted to impress him. It was, and I think that's why we're all determined to do well for him. It was a tough day the day he did leave. But, he was just a very, very inspirational man, and he understood why he'd done so well as a player. And he even said it himself, he made himself. He didn't have it wasn't God-given talent that he had. He had to work extremely hard, and he made himself into the very, very best. He obviously was a Ballon d'Or winner, and so he went to Liverpool and was successful. He went to Hamburg, one of the first British players to do that, and become very successful there. And you could see why, even when he joined in training with us, his work ethic was unbelievable. So the demands he put on us as players was nothing what he hadn't done before. And obviously we were in awe of him. I was, because I'd seen him in flesh and blood grab a football club that was in the doldrums and take it to somewhere that we could have only dreamed of, and then he come back and done it as a manager. So that's quite a unique man.
One of the players you played with, I'm interested to get your insight on, is Alan Shearer. He broke the world transfer record at the time when he joins Newcastle. He came in as a Premier League winner. A lot of people now, younger generations, will talk about Harry Kane and his goals for game ratio for England and even for Tottenham, but he's still got a long way to go, in my opinion, to match Alan Shearer. For me, the ultimate striker of the Premier League era. Oh,
without a shadow of a doubt. And me and Alan knew each other from the age of 9, 10. We played at the famous Wallsend Boys Club together. He was in the team above me, a couple of years above. So, our paths had crossed there. And obviously he's a Geordie that had to go away, first of all, to set up his career. And I think that was a big thing for him in any way. That was one of the major factors, I believe, that's made him the player he was. He went the opposite side of the country and made a name for himself there. And he came back, obviously broke the world record. That was the summer after we'd lost the 12-point lead to Manchester United. So the disappointment was then brought to euphoria, because we brought the best striker in the world back home. And what that created in the dressing room, what that created on the terraces, it was just unbelievable, And he was just you could tell by working with him straight away that he was just world class. And it wasn't by fluke either. It was like very similar to what I'm saying about Keegan. He worked extremely hard. He didn't, when he done shooting drills or he stayed behind and took penalties, he didn't do it, and he didn't try and do things that he wouldn't do in a game. He practiced what he'd done on the pitch. And he got very angry if he ever missed opportunities in training, but not angry where he didn't go for the next chance. That's what he had is in abundance. He was always in the danger zone, and scored all kinds of goals. Scored, block-busting shots, free kicks, tap-ins. They were all just as important because a goal's a goal, and he had that belief. And so yeah, it was like you say, he was at the top of the tree of him and Peter Beardsley. Peter Beardsley and Alan were probably the top of the tree of the unbelievable players that we had during that era.
And in terms of that era, as we've talked about already, so many people talk about going for the Premier League title, talk about the success in the league, but you also had some pretty special European nights. What was it like playing for Newcastle United in Europe in front of those fans? Because in the league they're nuts, but on a Tuesday or Wednesday night under the lights, it's even sweeter.
Fantastic. Dream come true. UEFA Cup then, and then Champions League. It was just phenomenal. And we missed a couple of years as well, because when we first qualified for Europe, when we got in the Premier League a few times, the British clubs were still banned from Europe. So we missed out on a couple of campaigns then, and when obviously that got lifted, we got into it. So just phenomenal nights, the Geordies going all over Europe and supporting us, the team. Terrific. And we had some fantastic games, and it's just to represent the club in any game was a dream come true for me, special, but to represent them in Europe was just, beyond me wildest dreams, really.
How do you look back on the first spell at Newcastle towards the end? Because I know it was a bit frustrating for you, where you were used to being in the team and then you were in and out and it was a bit stop-start. Is that something that, as a footballer, especially when you're a fan of the club, that frustrates you maybe more than most because it's your club and you want to contribute on the pitch?
Yeah, listen, there was no fallout. What had happened is Kevin had left. Kenny Dalglish had come in, and I played in Kenny's first 3 games, and we'd done well, and I'd scored in every game. We beat Charlton in an FA Cup replay. Myself and Shearer scored, and we won 2-1. We went to Villa and drew 2-2. I think me and Shearer scored again, and then down at Southampton, me and Ferdinand scored in a 2-2 draw as well. So I wasn't only just playing well, I was on a consistent run in terms of scoring and feeling good. Then we had a big cup tie against Forest the following week. But, as I said, I've just mentioned him. He was one of the best players, if not the best player the club's ever had. And Peter Beardsley, he was coming back from an injury, and the manager asked us into his office to say about, he was leaving us out because Peter was coming back. And I realised then, this was going to be difficult. I was competing against world-class players. There was Rob Lee in there was David Batty, it was all kinds of players in there competing for different places, and you had to be on top of your game. So this was in the January. A couple of clubs contacted us. I wasn't prepared to go then, but I had decided in the following summer it was time for us to go, because the toughest thing for any footballer, and especially someone who'd been used to playing, you get to that Saturday and you've worked extremely hard Monday to Friday to force your way in the team, and you maybe's not playing. So I decided then that the summer was going to be the time I was leaving. And even though the club and Kenny, they wanted us to stay, they offered us a new contract. But, that it wasn't about finance, it wasn't about security, it was just about having something at the end of the week. And so I decided to move on then. Before that, obviously, we finished second again in the Premier League. So that was a great way. And I then decided to move on.
And in terms of moving on, of all the places that you could go, you swapped Newcastle for Sunderland. How did you handle that at the time? What was the reaction at the time? Because obviously I'm 25, I'm just thinking about it even in the here and now, and I imagine it would cause a bit of fuss. How was it back then?
It was no problem to me, because I knew I'd go there and give me best. I was always open that I was a Newcastle fan as well as a player. When I went to Sunderland, I still used to go back to St James's Park or even to away games. and obviously went to the 2 cup finals when I was playing for Sunderland as a fan. So it was never a problem. As long as I had to get off to a good start, and I did. It was the first season at the Stadium of Light, and the first league game was Manchester City on a Friday night in front of the TV cameras. And we got off to a flyer. We beat them 3-1. Myself, Kevin Phillips and Niall Quinn scored the goals. And it just got better and better. And, I was a highly respected member of the team. I was player of the year, and I was enjoying my football. I was scoring plenty of goals and making plenty of goals. I had a great relationship on the pitch with Niall and Kevin Phillips. And what a great team. What a great manager. Peter Reid, I love playing for him. Paul Bracewell was a big mentor of mine from Newcastle, who was his assistant. So, yeah, it was fine. And there was good humoured banter when I went back to Newcastle off the fans. Nothing over the top, nothing too serious. And that was all good. So, and the Sunderland fans were happy because I was producing performances for them. So my wife was from the northeast. My home was actually closer to Sunderland's training ground than it was Newcastle's. And my oldest boy, but who was our only child at the time, had just been born. And then obviously we had our daughter who came along as well then. And we didn't have to uproot. So these all factors just made the decision no problem.
We talked about Alan Shearer and his quality earlier. Completely different footballer, so I'm not comparing them like for like, but describe what Kevin Phillips was like, because he's another guy who, for whatever reason, was always right place, right time, could score outside the box, could score inside the box.
Kevin has similar traits to Alan. The top finishers do. They all have very similar traits. Always playing on the shoulder of the last defender, sharp, very, very sharp in the penalty area, could score all kinds of goals and didn't mind what type of goals he scored. A 2-yard tap into a 30-yard thunderbolt in the top corner would give them just as much pleasure. He was great. I rattle off the strikers I played behind in my career, and it's unbelievable. I mean, you start off, you've got Mickey Quinn, you've got David Kelly, you've got Andy Cole, you've got Les Ferdinand, you've got Peter Beardsley, you've got Faustino Asprilla, you've got Alan Shearer, you've got Kevin Phillips, you've got Niall Quinn, you've got Louis Sahar, you've got Michael Owen. These are all the strikers that I played behind in club football. To name, there's probably some I've missed off, and I apologise to them, but it was just a phenomenal group of players that we had, and strikers that I was lucky enough to play behind, because it made my job quite simple. If I give them quality service, they had the attributes and the knowledge and the uncoachable, because strikers to get into, to have a striker's instinct, it's quite uncoachable actually, because they're always following little bits and pieces in off the keeper, off the post, off the bar. You try and coach them to someone, it's not natural. It is quite, they'll try and do it, but when people have that natural instinct, and I was lucky enough that all the strikers I've just rattled off there had that in abundance. So when you're playing behind them, as long as you can deliver things with a bit of quality, they'll do the hardest part and put it in the net.
Your last season at Sunderland, the club are promoted back to the Premier League. You then move on, you move to Fulham and move to London. What was it that attracted you to Fulham? Because, again, they're a football club that's always got a knack of attracting good players. You think of Van der Sar was there for a number of years, Berbatov went there as well. They've got a knack for attracting players.
Well, because we had a ridiculously ambitious chairman, Mohammed Al Fayed, who was prepared to invest millions and millions of pounds, not just in the team, but in the infrastructure, the football club. I mean, we would have had a super stadium, one of the best in Europe, but because where we were located on the River Thames, I don't know if you've ever been down to Craven Cottage. It's right in the middle of a housing estate. It's the riverside stand backs onto the Thames. So it makes it difficult to develop that. And then finding a new plot and a new location in the borough was difficult. But our training facility was phenomenal even then. And the squad, like you say, was always getting improved. I never ever thought I'd go and live in London. Whenever I played there, I felt it was a huge place and too big for a northeast lad. But when Paul Bracewell again played a big part, he was manager of Fulham at the time, and I took on the challenge, and I'm glad I did, because it was one of the best times of my life, both on and off the field. The football was fantastic. The area where I lived, my wife, my children, we loved it. And the club was just brilliant. They couldn't have done any more. And I love playing for the supporters there. I love going back. It's a special place, real special place to me and my family.
In terms of your time there, obviously you mentioned Bracewell and the impact that he has in getting you there. You play under Jean Tigana. What was that situation like? Because in the year that the club are promoted, there's a lot of attention on him. You go up as champions. It must have been a very good season. Saha, who you mentioned earlier, I think he scores 27 league goals, which just shows you how prolific he was that year.
Well, we went to a new way of working, and Tigana worked very similar to Wenger, and we had a British core in the squad. And obviously there's the people talk about, you get a foreign manager and you get a British core players who are quite senior in their years and experience, and he just got we all together, and we were ridiculously fit. It was the fittest I was always, my football was based on my fitness, my work ethic. But this guy took us to a new level in terms of fitness, took the group to a new level. The training methods, 3 times a day and early morning starts and all the different rehab and prehab and preparation for games, recovery was phenomenal. And the backing of the owner, as I said, to get the training ground up to the way he wanted it. I think we were one of the first to have bedrooms at the training ground, because this was like the year 2000, and because we used to train so much, we could rest and recover there. It was phenomenal, and he was a great guy, terrific coach, terrific manager. He felt he'd all done his work during the week, so on a match day he was quite relaxed. There wasn't a lot of messages passed on, and then if he had to say something at half time he would. But no, he took us to a new level, him and his staff, and we went, obviously got promoted, and we had a couple of good seasons, and then his relationship with the owner became a bit fragmented a little bit. I think it had started off that summer when John Tigana was our manager and Franco Baresi was our director of football. So Franco and the manager didn't particularly see eye to eye. We're 2 massive legends of the game, who were great guys with us, the players, but their relationship probably wasn't as strong or wasn't cemented in the way it should have been. So that caused 1 or 2 issues. He moved on, and then my big mate, who when I got to the club, we become big pals, Chris Coleman. He then become my boss. So I was captain of the team, and then under Chris, at the time we finished in our highest ever Premier League position. We got into Europe. We'd got into Europe for one of the first times in the club's history as well. And we probably would have finished higher. We finished 9th at the time, but we were 3rd in January, coming to the last days of January. And on deadline day, we sold Louis Saha without a replacement. And Louis had been on fire. He went to Manchester United for, I think, 17 million. Louis had caught their attention in few games. We went to Old Trafford and we beat Man United in their own backyard 3-1. Myself, Junichi Inamoto and Steve Malbronk had got the goals, but Louis' performance was terrific. Edwin van der Sar was magnificent in the goal, who later went to Man United. So, we'd lost our, like we say, main goal scorer, but not just a goal scorer. His overall play was just sensational. and it was tough to replace. So we dropped from third, and we still ended up ninth, which was a brilliant turnaround. But who's to say, even if we had just dropped a couple of places, we could have ended up in the top six. So, but great times, and was only being allowed to happen by an owner who was ready to back the club and who was a fantastic guy.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was the difficulties that Fulham and many teams in London have had in terms of redeveloping the stadium the way they want it. I know the club are doing that now. For a period of time, you played your home games at Loftus Road. How did you find that as a group of players? Because I imagine it could be quite awkward because it's not what you're used to at all in many ways.
No, it wasn't, and it wasn't so bad for me. You're a bit of an outsider because you don't know the full ins and outs. But they were the biggest rivals. They were only with Chelsea. I think was probably about a mile, from Fulham to QPR and Fulham to Chelsea. So the big rivals. So what they basically had was they had a change of like pictures and advertising and signage around the ground for when it was our match day. And I know a lot of the fans didn't particularly like that. They didn't enjoy that. But we still had some, made it a little bit of a fortress. We had to. I mean, couldn't do anything else. We had to get on with our jobs, and while Craven Cottage was getting redeveloped,
And in terms of Fulham, you've talked about how much you enjoyed it. It was a period of time you definitely look back fondly on. When Newcastle United come back and offer you the opportunity to go back there, was that something that just seemed like the perfect sort of full circle moment almost?
Well, I was out of contract for the first time in my career. I was coming up to my 34th birthday, and I was in a position that I'd never been in before. Pre-season had just started, and I didn't have a club. I was training on my own. And then I got the invitation, and I was a bit reluctant at first because they asked me to go in and train. They knew that I had ideas of going into the coaching side, and so they, after a couple of days, Graham Souness offered us a position as a player coach, and as I say, the rest's history. I was more signed initially as an emergency if the first team needed us, and ended up playing 30 Premier League games. And so I'd gone full circle. I'd started my career there and I finished it there. And the good thing for me was my children were growing up and they could see that their father playing for, Newcastle United, rather than me boring them with all the stories from previous years.
You mentioned the fact that you were coaching at the time as well as playing. Management always high up in your agenda. You go to Huddersfield, which was a good spell, but Birmingham City in particular was a very difficult spell for the club, but the fans still think a lot of you there as well.
It was a difficult time because I went there with the pretense of building on what Chris Hughton had done and got them in the playoffs. But within a matter of weeks, our owner, Carson Young, had been put under house arrest. His assets were all frozen. So the agenda from bringing players in to kick us on from playoffs to automatic promotion candidates, it just flipped on its head. And now we were fighting for financial survival. Ended up having to sell the best young players I had, which are the players I wanted to build the team around: Jack Butland, Nathan Redmond. And we were always up against it about bringing players in under certain embargoes, wage restrictions. Whenever we sold players, I couldn't really replace them by spending money. I spent money on two players, Paul Caddis, for a small fee, and obviously he repaid that with a famous goal at Bolton to keep us up. But also I sold a player who would bought previous summer for free, completely free, from Norwich, a guy called Tom Adeyemi. And a year later, we got £1 million for him, and the club gave me 150,000 of that to get a replacement. So I brought David Davis in from Wolves, who proved a positive player for the club. And it was a tough time. The fans were brilliant. Obviously, they didn't want to see the club where they were. They had high expectations, but I knew that the club had brilliant administration, staff, British, and they tried to run it as like a Premier League club. The training ground was quality, and I loved my time there. Under difficult circumstances, it was tough, but I still look on that as a very fun period of my career, even though there was some very, very tough days.
You mentioned the Paul Caddis goal in that game against Bolton. How did you feel going into that game as a manager, and how do you manage your group of players when there is so much on the line, not just for the fans, but as you know, with relegation worries, it's not just the players that would be affected, there's staff at the club, there's their families. How do you handle that as a manager?
I was quite relaxed, actually, and people can say, it's easy to say that now, but I was, and what I'd done in the hotel before the game, before we left for the ground, I didn't do the usual footage of Bolton's strengths and weaknesses. What I'd got an analyst to do is go around the families of all the players, the wives, the girlfriends, the children, the mums, the dads, the grandparents, the brothers and the sisters, and just put some messages on there. And I hadn't watched it until I sat with the players. I didn't want to see it beforehand, but I knew what was coming, and the players didn't. They just thought it was the usual pre-match stuff that was going to be on there, the set players for and against, and which we did touch on, but just tiny compared to what we'd usually do. And I just put this video on, and the room fell silent, and there was a lot of emotion in there. Not afraid and ashamed to say tears in many of our eyes, because it was fantastic. The messages from the wives, the girlfriends, the children, the mums, the dads, the brothers, the sisters, the grandparents. And when it finished, I've never seen a group of men get up and be so determined in their life. And I turned to my staff and I said, we'll sort ourselves out today. We just got to hope the other result goes our way as well. And even at 2-0, we went 2-0 down. I turned to my staff and I said, no problem, we'll be all right. They must have thought I was crazy, but I just had this inner feeling. We were playing well. They had 2 or 3 chances, scored from 2. My team were playing well. We didn't deserve to be 2 down, but they came up with the goods. And it was brilliant watching a bet for the neutral 96 minutes equaliser to keep the club in the league. Watching a crazy manager go sprinting down the touchline to 5,000 blue noses behind the goal, who were all dressed as Peaky Blinders. And I said it afterwards, it would have been Armageddon for the club if it had went down with the financial situation it was in. But thankfully it didn't. And as you say, the one thing I did mention to the players was, yes, it would affect us as a group, the management and the players, and, wouldn't be nice to have. And but the most important people, the office staff, the people behind the scenes, who most of the time at football clubs are fans of that club, they would have probably lost their jobs with the cost cutting, and we couldn't do that for them. We didn't want that to happen. They were the people that motivated us, and the supporters. That they were the ones we wanted to get the result for first and foremost, and thankfully we did.
That was a very interesting spell of your managerial career, and another spell you can tell from the accent. I'm based in Scotland. What was it like for you when you went into Kilmarnock at the time that you did in 2016? Because the club were struggling when you went in initially, but you turned it around, and of course you go into a playoff final where a lot of Kilmarnock fans. I know. Alan Mahood's a former Kilmarnock player who I'm quite close with, and I remember he describes those days as being really nerve-wracking as a fan, but you couldn't have done it in any more convincing fashion in the end.
No, listen, the first leg on the Friday night, we were by far and away the dominant team. We gave a shocking goal away in injury time, switching off from a set play. So we gave ourselves a little bit of a problem, but we talked about it straight away. We got that game out of our system straight after the game. We watched the goal straight in the dressing room. There was no time to have a debrief the next day, because we had to focus on the second leg. So we recovered the players, and then we were going to train the day before the game. And I just sensed a little bit of nervousness amongst the lads, and I said to my assistants, Lee McCulloch and Peter Levine, I said that I didn't think it would be beneficial if we'd done a session the day before the game where we would be talking about the game itself, because I think that would put added pressure on them. And I just said, get the club minibus, we'll go down the beach. We'll have a walk along the seafront. We'll grab ourselves a square sausage sandwich or a bacon sandwich, and we'll just chill out and chat amongst ourselves and take away the thoughts of the game, because they're going to have the pressure the next day of the game itself. And I just wanted them to relax the day before, because the nervous energy can be worse than the physical energy. It can just completely drain you. So I tried my very best to take that away. And whether it worked or not, I don't know. But I've just actually watched the footage back from that game, the highlights, and we started like an absolute steam train. And we just blew Falkirk away, really, and ran out convincing winners. At 4 could have been more. And that done the job for us. And what it showed us is the Kilmarnock fans, the numbers that turned out that day was phenomenal. It was brilliant. And, a bit of a rebuild then. And we've done it. And we rebuilt the squad with new signings, but also some good loan signings as well. And got the team into the top 6 when up before I left. And in hindsight, shouldn't have left. Went back down south thinking the Bury one would be a good one for us to get us back in the spotlight down there to try and get to the Championship and then possibly back into the Premier League. Didn't work out with financial reasons. After keeping them up in a similar sort of scenario to Kilmarnock the following season, after we invested in the team to try and get them promoted, I then sensed the financial issues that were coming to the fore and decided that was probably best to move on. And so in hindsight, and when I look back of what, once Billy Bowie went in as sole owner of the club, the backing and the changes that were made in the infrastructure of the club and the backing of the managers, wish I'd have stayed, because I had a good relationship with Billy, very good. And, the club was great. It was brilliant. I loved it. I didn't move for any other, for reasons that I thought it could get me back and get me a chance to get into the Premier League in England. It wasn't to be. It was a wrong decision. And, if I could turn back time now, that would be the one thing. There's not many regrets I have, but that is certainly one that if I'd have carried on and the way we were going, if we could have finished the season in the top 6, then carried on the rebuild. But it wasn't to be. But I still look out for the results. It's still an important club. The fans were brilliant. They've got the right man in charge now. Ex-teammate of mine, Tommy Wright, good friend of mine. I work with him at Norwich as well, and obviously Paul Stevenson, who was on my staff, who I brought up to Kilmarnock, so I was assistant. So 2 guys I'm really close with. Couldn't have picked a better manager, in my opinion. Tommy knows the league. He knows how to get out of that position. Then he knows how to rebuild, like he did at St Johnstone. So the last result, brilliant. 4-1 against Motherwell. Hopefully they can get another couple of results now. The split's in order to just make sure the relegation issue isn't there, and also they don't even need the playoff. And then they can look to rebuild next season with Tommy's experience of trying to push the club up the table and get back to what Steve had achieved, Steve Clarke, in a brilliant couple of years.
Absolutely, that's what Kilmarnock fans definitely want to hear. And one player you worked with who's very topical at the moment in Scottish football, you had him for a period of time at Kilmarnock, was Christopher Ayer, who's at Celtic now. He's been linked with moves to the Premier League. He's been linked with AC Milan over in Italy as well. Just what was he like to work with, and what's your opinion of him now?
Well, first of all, he's being linked with Newcastle. So from a selfish point of view, I hope we stay up and we can get him, because he'll be a brilliant signing for us. And when I signed him, I was before we got him in the January window, I was speaking with Brendan for many, many weeks. I know Brendan well. We've known each other since we were 15, playing against each other, England schoolboys versus Northern Ireland schoolboys. So I was in discussion with him, and what Brendan wanted fitted what I wanted as well, because Christopher's a centre half, but he can also play midfield. And Brendan asked me if we could play him in midfield, which I seen as a good position for Christopher at that time, just so that he could get used to playing in tight areas. So when he went back to playing as a centre back, he was accomplished on the ball, which obviously he is, and it became easier for him because he'd been plying his trade in midfield. So we done that, and I played him. I got him alongside Sean Longstaff from Newcastle on loan, and I played the 2 of them, and they were sensational. for young players. They were just brilliant. They added a new dynamic to the group. There was a couple of times where I had to drop Christopher back to centre half during games when we'd lost a centre half through injury or something, just for a minimum amount of time. But majority of the time was playing him in that midfield role, and he was a presence, 6'4", elegant on the ball, could drive through the midfield with it, could see a short pass, could see a long pass, and he had an unbelievable attitude. Always wanted to stay behind and do extra training. So not surprised to see how successful he's been at Celtic. And if he does come to England, I hope Newcastle can stay up and we can be one of the clubs that go for him. And if I can try and influence him in any way, I'll be on the phone. I mean, I don't want to fall out with the Celtic fans. I mean, I'm not trying to tap him up, but if he has got his eye on moving down south, hopefully he can come to Newcastle.
A few quick fire ones just before I let you go, Lee, and thanks for being so generous with your time. What was the favourite kit of yours when you were playing during your career? Because you played with in some iconic Newcastle kits, some of those Fulham kits as well. Fans still talk about. What was your favourite kit to play in?
The Newcastle one with the Granda collar neck with the Newcastle brown nail on the front, and we had an away kit that was maroon and blue hoops with cream shorts. Because we had some phenomenal results and performances. We went to White Hart Lane and just blew them away. Sheffield Wednesday, I think that was when everyone first got a glimpse of David Ginola. We went to Bolton before that, and Ginola and Ferdinand were just unplayable. So they're iconic strips. I think they're quite popular with Newcastle fans as well. So yeah, they're probably the two that stand out.
What about the favourite goal that you scored in your career and why?
People ask us this, and I haven't really got standout ones. Obviously, I'd probably say in terms of like dreams was being my first one, but it didn't really matter because it was in a 2-1 defeat at Wolves, and I've always been that type of person who, if I score and we've lost, it doesn't really mean much. But that should stand out. I mean, when you think at the time, I didn't know, but we last goal, and which was on New Year's Day in the 94th minute in a Tyne Tees derby against Middlesbrough to get an equaliser. Was that desperate? Shearer was even up for the corner, so he reckons he was behind us to volley it in. But as I said to him, he didn't have the quality to put it in the net, so it's a good job I got there first. So probably that one, because now I know it was my last ever goal. It was an important goal, and it was for the club I love. So that one probably stands out.
Last two questions for you, Lee. First one, most underrated players you've played with?
Most underrated. You're probably going to look at defenders because they don't get a lot of publicity, do they? It's the strikers who get a lot of the publicity, and it's players who do things. I mean, obviously, as I said, Paul Bracewell was a player who not only mentored us, I played alongside him, and he'd done a lot of good things for us, playing as a more defensive player and allowed me in the early days to go and attack. Kevin Ball done a similar role for myself and Alex Ray at Sunderland. He allowed us to go and break forward. You're probably looking at players. I mean, when I first went to Fulham, Steve Finnan wasn't on the radar, then obviously burst onto the scene, got his big move to Liverpool and done very well Republic of Ireland. So there's many players. Difficult and feel gutted because I've named some there and I've probably left some top ones out as well. So I believe I was a lucky guy. I played in some brilliant teams I played in 3 brilliant teams at the 3 clubs I had, successful in different ways, and it was all those teams were littered with great, not just great footballers, great guys as well. And so yeah, I think I've been a lucky fella.
You mentioned those great teams, and you've played in so many great teams, but you've also played against so many top teams as well. Last question I've got for you: who would you say your toughest opponents were over the years?
Well, I always say, lucky enough to have played against Zidane and Boban and people like these from Europe, Pep Guardiola, various different players. Luis Figo. But because we play them so regular, I picked two because the combination of the two of them, they just had everything between the two of them, and they were phenomenal. Was Roy Keane and Paul Scholes were a combination that were just breathtaking at times. And I got to meet them socially, and the two of them were so down to earth, it was untrue. And I obviously dealt with Roy as well as a fellow manager when I signed Jordan Rhodes from Ipswich. Roy was manager, and he was so humble and down to earth in his conversations. So they're two players that I admired and were my toughest opponents. I mean, I've come up against some tough combinations. I had Vieira and Petit at Arsenal. Obviously had Beckham, and Giggs was also involved in that midfield at Man United. You had Alonso and Gerrard at Liverpool, Callister at Liverpool. You had some real top talent to play against in those eras. So yeah, it was tough.
Brilliant, Lee. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you every success with your new challenge, and I'll be sure to keep an eye on your results.
Thanks, Cal.